Shopify grows with your business no matter how far or big you grow. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage? Shopify is there to help you grow. Whether you're selling your fans' next favorite shirt or an exclusive piece of podcast merch, Shopify helps you sell everywhere. From their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their in-person POS system, wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to grow your business no matter what stage you're in.
Welcome to Accelerate Your Business Growth, where we're exploring all sorts of business topics. Experts from around the world join me, your host, Diane Helbig, for a conversation where they share their expertise with all of you. Take what you need when you need it. Featured on Inc.com, Forbes, and MSNBC's Your Business, this podcast is recognized as one of the best podcasts for small business, sales, leadership, social media, and more. When it comes to business, Accelerate Your Business Growth has got it covered. And now on with the show. My guest today is Henrik Muller-Hansen. Henrik is the founder and CEO of Gelato, a software company that gives e-commerce businesses around the globe instant access to the world's largest production-on-demand network. By facilitating global trade through local production, high-quality custom products can be sold globally, affordably, and sustainably. He holds a Master's of Science and Engineering with a concentration in managerial economics from the Stockholm School of Economics and has also been a member of the Swedish Navy's underwater demolition team. Thanks so much for joining me today, Henrik.
It's a pleasure. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm thrilled to have you here. I'm curious, from your perspective, what you think some of the challenges small businesses, and particularly in the e-commerce space, are facing in today's market.
Yeah, so, if you have a small e-commerce business today, first thing is you need to reach the full potential of your business, which basically means you need to reach the world of consumers. Now, naturally, it depends on if you're on Etsy, for example, and you have a very bespoke product, you might not need to reach outside of New York, but most entrepreneurs, most people that want to start an e-commerce business or running an e-commerce business, they want to reach the world of consumers. So that's one of the challenges. The other challenge is, of course, that you need to do that very cost efficiently. So building up your own warehouse, producing before you actually receive the orders, that is an equally big challenge. Because you're many times you're quite bootstrapped as you get started or even as you scale. I read this fantastic book, which I recommend, Shoe Dog, by Phil Knight, who founded Nike. For the first 20 years, that company was basically every month close to bankruptcy. And one of the reasons why that was the case was because you had to buy the things before you sold it, right? So you sit on inventory, and that in itself is a challenge. So those are two very specific, concrete examples of challenges that production on demand with the global network is helping you to solve.
Yeah, boy, I see that. It's interesting. As you were talking about that, I was thinking, I think it also changes the psychology of the founder or the salespeople, like if you have all of this inventory, then there's I'm going to call it eagerness, but stress to sell, to, make that back, to get that product out. Where with production on demand, you really can make sure that you're building those relationships and connecting people to the products that they need, and doing it in a way that works for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting when you think about the traditional retailers, right? The usual suspects.
Yeah.
I mean, when they sell, let's say, red T-shirts, to make a prime example here, they produce that way before they come into the stores, right? So some of these global retailers, they have thousands of stores in many continents on this planet. So let's say they produce 20 million red T-shirts, and then they hope that somehow that will match the demand. Well, it turns out it's rarely the case. So in apparel alone, I think, I mean, don't quote me on this, but there is somewhere around 90 million tons of clothing that is being either burnt or landfilled every year. Now, why that is, and of course, it's sent to Chile or Africa, and how do we know that? Well, they've traced it. I mean, there are many people and companies that have just followed these garments as they travel around the world. So eventually, this outdated model, someone has to change that. And production on demand is more of a concept. And we are one of the providers of production on demand. And as technology improves, and as we become more and more global from an e-commerce perspective, those global production on demand networks that Gelato represents unleashes a lot of kind of not only growth aspects, but just also sustainability aspects. Because producing 20 million T-shirts, of which 10 million are sold, that's not just, it just feels so outdated in many ways. And so technology has actually moved faster than the actual tools linking to e-commerce players, right? So it just, it not only is fun to build a business like Gelato, but it actually feels quite good to bring production where you need it and when you need it, and also in the quantity you need. Now, then you could say that, well, you still buy that T-shirt from a country far away, and then you ship it to France, or you ship it to the UK or the US, and then you print it there. And that all of that is true. But there is a very important data point in that, which also just highlights the importance of production on demand. Because what also lies in the concept of production on demand is that you personalize those products. And when you personalize a product, let's say, again, we stick to the T-shirt example, it turns out that fast fashion, typically you wear an item that has been produced in the world of fast fashion 6-7 times. But and I know our favorite T-shirt, it could be a T-shirt we bought or fixed or designed 10 years ago, and we still have it because it's just personalized for you, and it carries much more than just the weight of a T-shirt.
Boy, that is so, it's such a good point you were saying that. And I was thinking to myself, what bums me out is when I have one of those favorite T-shirts and it gets to the point where I just can't wear it anymore, but I can't replace it either. And in this case, I probably could replace it.
Yeah. No, speaking about the underwater demolition team, I had one of those T-shirts. This was many years ago, right?
Yeah.
Like 30 years ago. And it still pains me that I had to throw that away. So I think there is this design aspect also that stretches, of course, beyond just the sustainable aspect. But if you could have a choice, I mean, I have 3 children, and if you would ask them, what do you prefer? Do you prefer to buy a red T-shirt, produce halfway around the world, and 3 months later you buy it, and then you compare that to designing your T-shirt on your own? You produce it. In this case, I'm sitting in Oslo, Norway. You produce it in the Nordics or even in Norway. You support the local business community, and then you get it shipped 2-3 days later. You have it in your hands, and so it feels like the consumer, in a way, has moved on and is very much leaning into the local production on demand notion, but the world is still living in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's a good question, but I think partly we need to bring the solutions to the consumer market, and you also need to, I mean, consumers are always trailblazers when it comes to shifts in demand and shifts in consumption. But if you think about the traditional methods of manufacturing, and you think about the number of decades and centuries it's taken to develop those global supply chains, I mean, that's not something you change overnight. And then, of course, also, I mean, just raw macroeconomic data suggests that when interest rates hike and people lose purchasing power, you, of course, focus perhaps on that red T-shirt for $4, $5, $6. But I think that as technology in terms of production on demand becomes better and better, as our capillarity in the network we've built becomes more and more refined, we will become more and more cost efficient. But if you would ask me, like, why is it still the case that these global supply chains thrive and continue to grow, I think cost is a very important component in it. And we of course need to, it's Maslow's pyramid, need of pyramid, where if you have a family and you're short on cash, you will go for the $5 red T-shirt.
Right.
And the old traditional way of manufacturing has allowed economies of scale at very, very, high degrees to drive down cost, and that fuels consumption for any family that is short on cash at the end of the month.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And it's interesting you're talking about this, and I'm thinking, but this whole concept also alleviates a lot of the supply chain issues that we've dealt with over, the past, I don't know, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, that's such an interesting reflection also. I mean, imagine 5 years ago, everything that has happened on this planet, who would ever think, right?
Yeah.
And so, of course, I mean, no one wishes the pandemic, the wars, the political divide, the polarization of the world to be the drivers of your business model. But inevitably, that has partly been the case in terms of gelato, that the local production on demand model is almost a vaccine against the disruption of those global supply chains. I mean, when was it? Was it like 2-3 years ago when this ship was stuck in the Suez Canal? And so it says also a lot about, like, we feel very robust, but humanity and the way we live, the model we've built or the models we have around us are surprisingly fragile, considering the events that has happened during the last 4 or 5 years. So I think, you have these global trends, and I'm also thinking about another one, which I have followed with interest. If you think about a company like Starbucks, right? And you go back 10 years, 15 years, how many merchandise branded with the beautiful Starbucks logo in Seattle with the Space Needle, in Paris with the Eiffel Tower, in London with Big Ben, and in Australia, Sydney, the Opera House. Like, how many stores does Starbucks have around the world, and how much merchandise are they selling? I think Starbucks today have somewhere around, and again, don't quote me on this, but I think it's like 37, 38,000 stores in more than 80 countries.
Wow.
And if you think about this really significant new business of Starbucks, which comes on top of, the cold beverages and the coffee, think about all the merchandise. When you go into a Starbucks shop today, think about all the merchandise. Where's that produced? How can we make that more efficient? I mean, it's obvious that it's personalized, right? You don't buy the Eiffel Tower mug when you're in Seattle.
Right.
And so you have so many of those business models that the actual personalization, the localized design is a driver of consumption, and it's a driver of revenue. But how can we make that just more effective, more cost efficient, more sustainable? Because it's the trend. Like, we even have in our family, when we go traveling, it's not uncommon that the kids say, let's buy a mug, it's a good souvenir. And of course, we're in a Starbucks store, right?
You know what's so interesting about this? We're having this conversation, and just this morning, I heard a news story that Starbucks is starting to get into the fast food value meal, wars, I will call them. And I was sitting there listening to the story, and I was thinking, well, this is going to ruin their brand, because their whole brand has been around the experience, and that there's value and paying for that value. And now basically what they're going to be saying is, not so much. It's just like everyone else. And I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, boy, if they understood this, they could be not producing, spending all of that money ahead of time, producing all that stuff that then they have to hope they sell. So it would be, I mean, am I right in that would be more cost effective for them?
So there are many benefits. I am not sure that I would ever go to Starbucks today and say, you know what, we can provide you with X million mugs, personalized down to the most common tourist object in each city across the planet. I don't think we're there yet.
Okay.
But if the question is, where do you think Starbucks production model will go towards for the coming 5 to 10 years? There is no question in my mind that it will move. And not only Starbucks, but, many others like Zara and H&M and Gap and Walmart. Like,
right.
There are so many reasons, some of which we have already spoken about, for why that just makes a ton of sense, right? And there is this notion also when we speak about production on demand. I mean, we speak a lot about countries and supply chains, but for me, it's almost even more interesting to speak about the mega cities of the planet. And that goes to this, Starbucks discussion we're having, because it's not really about the countries. It's about the mega cities. If you look at a mega city today, I had a person here visiting Gelato, and she's from India, and she said, "Yeah, I come from a relatively small town in India." And I asked her, "What's a relatively small town in India?" It's about 10 million people.
Oh my goodness.
And my thought was like, what if we can just like bring local production, local distribution, where we can allow that mega city to produce the goods that they are consuming.
Right.
Like that, so this discussion about local production and local distribution, coupled with the thought around mega cities and what we could do there, that is a very, very interesting discussion, because it's not only we now so far in this podcast have spoken a lot about what's consumed and how it's produced, but there's also who is producing it. So there was this friend of mine who was sitting on a plane. She had been to Athens and Greece last summer, and there was a person next to her, and they started to chat. And after a while, you know how it is, they came into the discussion about, what are you up to? What are you doing? And he said that I'm actually producing in Norway for e-commerce entrepreneurs from all over the world that are selling to Norwegian consumers. And my friend asked, like, but how do you do that? Well, we have a partnership with a company named Gelato. So I have 40 people right outside of Oslo producing for designers, creators, and entrepreneurs from all across the world. As a matter of fact, like more than 70 countries that are selling to Norwegian consumers. And I get to produce it in Norway and ship it overnight to these consumers. Now, it's pretty clear to me that as production technologies improves, as production cost goes down, as we build more and more capacity and capabilities of producing a wider array of products, that this is the future. And there is much more to that future than connecting creators and makers at a local city level, but also the whole sustainability aspect, as we've spoken about, and the creator economy. We haven't even been into discussing the creator economy, but that phenomenon in itself it's a pretty big macro trend. It's a mega trend, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And it fuels e-commerce, and it also almost is reliant upon production on demand, because great creators in the creator economy, they per se, it's kind of like rooted in the very notion of the creator economy, is very much into personalized designs and personalized products.
So, wow, that is so interesting. So this may sound like a strange question, but what's the role that 3D printers play in this, or is there one?
I don't think it's a strange question at all. I think it's a great question. I think it's a great question, and it's a question I've been thinking a lot on, and also Gelato, right? Like, as a company, I've spent quite some time traveling around and looking at 3D printing facilities and also the 3D printing technologies. And what makes the technology really, really interesting is the fast pace with which it is developing. But I would also say that it really, over time, will fuel the trends that we have spoken about, where you move from centralized mass production to local, on-demand production of highly personalized products. And so again, the mega trend is there. I think the trend, at least from my perspective, is inevitable. So then what is holding it back? So what I've observed, now I'm not, an expert in 3D printing or additive manufacturing, which is also referred to, but what I've seen when I've been out traveling is it is still slow in its actual production, but more importantly, it contains still a big portion of post-production finishing. So let's say you do a home decor item.
Mm-hmm.
The actual production of the home decor item, let's say it takes 5 hours. But then you have the post-finishing, the post-production finishing, and that can take the same amount of time. And so what I typically see when I'm out there visiting these facilities is that there is an army of people sitting and doing post-production, finishing. Let's say you do a Christmas ornament, right? Then you need to sit there and refine that object to the point where it's just still not scalable, right?
Yeah.
But, it's clear where, Wayne Gretzky had that saying where, you skate to where the puck is going and not where it's at. I mean, it's clear to me where the puck is going.
Yeah.
But how long time it will take is, number one, reliant and dependent on the production technology.
Right.
Number two, the post-production finishing and how much time is needed to really craft a beautiful object. And then, of course, the economies of scale, the actual cost of the object. So that is still, none of those parameters, at least from what we have seen, are in place. However, two things. One, it depends on the object and the product you want to sell. So Christmas ornaments just happens to be one of those products where it actually could scale. Because it's quite easy to produce certain Christmas ornaments. It is a very big market, believe it or not. And post-production finishing is actually quite fast and not so complicated. So that's kind of like just an interesting aspect of, it's also dependent. What I want to say with that first example is it's also dependent on what type of product you go after. Now, the other thing, sorry?
I'm sorry, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, no, I think that the choice of product is actually more important than we think. But there is another aspect that I find really interesting with 3D printing. And it goes to the core of the name, additive manufacturing. So if you go to traditional manufacturing, you take a block of steel and then you carve out the final product. Now, obviously, I'm making this, in a very simplified form when I explain this, but you start from a block of material and then you shape it down to the end product. What I have seen and what makes me very fascinated about the 3D printing industry, and in this particular case, let's use the word of additive manufacturing, is that you start from one molecule, one single element, and then you build it out. So there is like zero waste in a way, in this way of producing. And again, skate to where the puck is going and not where it's at. I believe that 3D printing over time will be the inevitable technology for many different products that we are using in heavy industries, but also in our daily lives. And speaking about, the fragility of the global supply chains, I mean, imagine as 3D printing technologies improve and we get more and more reliable production processes here, this is a real vaccine for a global supply chain fragility.
Yeah, boy, no kidding. What is the impact, if any? And so I don't want to say if any, I want to say, is there a significant? So I'll ask the question differently. Will there be a significant, if any, impact on the employment rate with production on demand? Does it have an impact on that?
I mean, these are big questions.
Yeah.
I mean, covering that in a podcast, it's not easy. So let's stick to what I see and
Okay.
what I
Right.
I mean, if you go back 10 years and you think about you're a creator, you sit in, let's just say, Idaho, the US, and you are thinking about, you're unemployed, but you're a fantastic artist and you want to leverage your design abilities, and you have this business idea, producing art on canvases or art on hoodies or t-shirts, right? Like 10 years ago, what would you do about that? How would you go about it, right? Most of the time, and I'm wildly generalizing now, that's where the journey would end. Because there are so many obstacles you had to deal with. Some technological, others just pure atoms, physical. I mean, if you think about Shopify, Etsy, you then add PayPal, and then you add Gelato, and you think about what these platforms, these global platforms, offer to these creators, to these designers. That is something that 10 years ago would be pretty hard to fathom, pretty hard to see. So from that perspective, I think that the creator economy, coupled with these global software platforms and marketplaces, have really leveled the global playing field to the point where an individual designer can almost compete head to head with Gap. And especially if you add the personalization element and how, for many consumers today, important it is to feel that you buy the design you want. It's almost like, e-commerce and the globalization has driven consumers to the point where they expect fully personalized products delivered overnight. Now, the other side of the coin, if that's the creators, the other side of the coin are the makers. And something we haven't spoken so much about is that, you mentioned that Gelato is a software company, but we connect to production hubs all across the planet. Today we have, we're closing in on 150 production hubs in more than 30 countries around the world. And basically we can produce overnight to 5 billion people, 5 billion consumers in those 32 countries. So on the other side of the coin are makers. And then I mentioned earlier in the show about this maker that was sitting and meeting my friend on a plane back from Greece. Thanks to Gelato and thanks to production on demand and thanks to the creator economy, and also thanks to Shopify and Etsy and the global payment platforms, all of that combined allows a maker to employ people in Idaho or in Oslo. So in this case, the creator sits in Idaho, we have a maker in Oslo, there is a consumer in Oslo that buys from this creator in Idaho, and we produce it here in Oslo with our partner, with our production partner. And so when you marry creators and makers over a global platform, a global marketplace like Gelato, I do believe that there are jobs created in a good karma fashion, because I believe that our role and one of our responsibilities is to build tools for other people. Like, we all have that role.
Yeah.
And in a way, through this podcast, you're providing a tool to entrepreneurs and people that are thinking about starting their own business or have their own business, or, the wider business community. So you're also creating a tool. And in our case, we're creating a tool that creators and makers can leverage, and they can meet them on this marketplace and exchange services. And when they exchange services, jobs are created.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Excuse me, Henrik. I mean, this is fascinating to me. And thank you so much for going to the places that I wanted to go.
No, thank you.
They were some big questions, and I appreciate you. And for sharing all this. There's so much more to it. And unfortunately, we only have so much time, but so maybe you'll come back. But will you tell the listeners how they can find you, please?
You can just go to gelato.com and you'll find us there, or you can go to LinkedIn, and if you want to personally reach out to me, you go to LinkedIn and Henrik Muller-Hansen Gelato and send me a message.
Excellent. That's so great. As I said, thank you. I so appreciate this conversation. And listeners,
thank you, Diane.
Absolutely. And listeners, thank you. You are who we're doing this for. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Accelerate Your Business Growth, a production of Evergreen Podcasts. Discover more episodes of this podcast and explore others at evergreenpodcast.com. As always, continue to prosper and be curious. And if you're looking to get your sales strategy headed in the right direction, pick up a copy of Succeed Without Selling on Amazon or wherever books are sold. Until we meet again on another episode of Accelerate Your Business Growth, goodbye and good day.
Do you love news about LinkedIn, Indeed, Google, and just about every other recruitment tech company out there?
Hell yeah. I'm Chad.
I'm Cheese.
We're the Chad and Cheese Podcast.
All the latest recruiting news and insights are on our show,
dripping in snark and attitude.
Subscribe today wherever you listen to your podcasts.
We out.